right. I call the Honourable Member Holly Walker. Tēnā koe.
Take a call on Part 1 of the Building Amendment Bill number 3. It's my first call as the Green Party spokesperson on housing and the first of many in this area, I hope. I'd just like to begin by addressing the context for Part 1 of this bill, and I would say that it's fair to say that the context for this bill is that we have a crisis in housing in New Zealand, a crisis in both affordability of housing and a crisis in the availability of housing. And the amendments that this bill makes to the Building Act are relevant to how we're going to address that crisis of affordability and availability. On the affordability side, I think we have a situation where home ownership and indeed the privilege of being able to build one's own home is a distant dream for more and more New Zealanders, particularly those New Zealanders of my generation who are starting families and looking for the security and stability that often comes along with home ownership, but finding that it is out of their reach. We have a housing affordability crisis, especially in Auckland, and I note that new figures from Statistics New Zealand prepared for the Auckland Council show that up to 85,000 households in Auckland are currently paying unaffordable rents, which is partly a consequence of the unaffordability of home ownership as well. So that's 85,000 households who are in what we would describe as housing stress. And that is when you are obliged to spend more than 30% of your income on your housing costs in your rent or your mortgage. Statistics New Zealand estimates that 45% of Auckland households are in this state of housing stress and pay more than 30% of their income on rent or mortgage. So it's extremely problematic. On the other side of the coin, we have a crisis of housing availability. We have over 10,000 people on Housing New Zealand's waiting list, and yet we have a narrowing of the priorities of who is considered for social housing. We have a government talking the talk on expanding the social housing unit within the Department of Building and Housing, but no action yet, and some concern about the direction that is going when we have an extreme need to increase the availability of social housing in New Zealand. We have the absurd decision of Housing New Zealand not to see its clients in person anymore, despite this crisis of housing availability and the long waiting lists that they face. And we have Housing New Zealand stock being demolished and not necessarily replaced to meet the needs of local communities. We have the Christchurch rebuild effort, which we are facing, an estimation of 10,000 new homes needing to be built, and this legislation is very relevant to that effort. And we have an estimated 70,000 homes required in Auckland in order to meet the housing availability crisis simply in Auckland alone. So I think it's fair to say, Mr Chair, that this bill and the context for the building of new homes that it sets is very important when we consider how we are going to deal with the crisis of affordability and availability in housing. So obviously building new dwellings is part of the solution to the crisis of affordability and availability, and in that context the Green Party supported the Building Act review that was initiated by the last government. However, like our colleagues from the Labour Party, we find that we cannot support this bill as a response to that Building Act review when it takes such a piecemeal approach. Mr Chairman, our concern is that a major thrust of this bill is about loosening up regulation, ostensibly to expedite the building of new dwellings, but as we have learned from the leaky homes crisis, this is an extremely dangerous approach to take. I think it's important that in considering Part 1 of this bill, and indeed the rest of the bill, the House takes into account the conclusions of the Hun report on leaky homes in 2002, which concluded that the deregulation of the building industry undertaken by the national government in the 1990s represented a major systemic breakdown across the whole industry. And, Mr Chairman, our view is very much that we must take an extremely cautious approach and ensure that this does not happen again. Mr Chairman, we note that there is another building amendment bill on the order paper, number 4, and I've heard the Minister suggest that those recommendations from the Building Act review that are not covered in this bill will be covered in that one. And so to that extent, we tentatively support that, and I understand that that bill will deal, Mr Chair.
I call the Honourable Minister Morris Williamson.
Chairman, given this is a new